Cool. Thank you. So we're going to be having a little bit of change of pace, I guess, with our current talk. So it's a little bit about journey from moving from web2 into web3. This includes a little bit of my personal journey and a little bit of the work that's been done. So kind of like you'll see that it's a little bit intertwined, but we'll get started. So a 20-year journey from web2 to web3. A little bit about me, so just so you know, I'm going to age myself. So my name is Ev, and I'm 38 years old. I do live in Toronto, and I'm a 2x startup founder. I started a company called 500px. It's still around. You can check it out at 500px.com. And Sloika, which is my current startup. My claim to fame, just to kind of like break ice a little bit, I met King Charles III on the third and shook his hand, and also was beaten by Cheetah, though not on the same occasion. There was different occasions. And I've been passionate about photography for the last 23 years, so it's been quite a long journey for me. So kind of like a little bit about why photography. I think it's one of the most important mediums that we have. We are inherently visual animals. We love to look at great photos. We love photography. And, you know, whether we explore and whether we're in the world, we're always surrounded by some sort of imagery. So for me, that was a journey where I wanted to capture the beauty of the world. That's one of the images that I took in Italy. But, you know, in the bottom right, you'll see that usually dressed up pretty warm. You got to be like waking up before sunrise, getting to the locations, getting shots. So this is something that I'm passionate, and tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of people are passionate about, and going and taking pictures. I mean, all of us have not just phones in our pockets, we have like multiple cameras in our pockets, and most of us take pictures, whether it's selfies of different kind. So when we started on the journey with 500px, that was a decade ago, we'll get it in that in a moment. There's few things that are important to creators, and those are money, fairness, and leverage. By money, I mean, it's very simply, you want to have a living wage, especially if you're making photography into your profession or dedicating a lot of time to this. You kind of like want to get compensated with fairness. So kind of like making sure that the platforms that people use or the middleman, that they compensate creators fairly. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And leverage. So basically, if you're utilizing the platform, that the platform is giving you the leverage to achieve your goals. And an example, with 500px or Instagram or any other platform, it's basically using platform to utilize likes and exposure that you get and convert it into followers, and convert followers into sales of some kind, or, you know, orders or things like that. So when we started with 500px, that was 2003. So I told you it's going to be a 20-year journey. And in 2003, if you would type in facebook.com, you'll find nothing, because Facebook did not exist. If you type almost any other website, maybe except Google and a few others, they would not exist. So when we started, you could only do very simple things. You can post picture, comment, follow, maybe share via email or text messages, and like images. So getting to the next stage of that, and meaning like, you know, enabling personal e-commerce, something that we take for granted today, was pretty difficult. And making portfolio websites, as many photographers are currently using or creators are using, was pretty much impossible, because technology was just getting there in the next 3 or 4 years. But kind of like photography and the artistry and the creative part is a lifelong mission for me. And so the underlying foundation is arming artists with the tools for the digital renaissance. And it kind of like stems from 20 years ago, when in 2003, starting with this, it meant enabling commercial success with the marketplace and discovery. So getting likes, getting exposure, and allowing photographers to basically sell their images. But in 2020, made a mistake, it's not 2011, it's 2021, enabling artistic provenance, autonomy, transparency. And we kind of like go into that in the end of the presentation as well. So what to do. I was passionate about building something for artists because I was an artist myself. And for me, the journey looked like, well, we started FireNPX as a live journal blog. Then 6 years later, found my co-founder, and it took 6 years. It was a pretty long journey. Then in 2010, we quit our day jobs to focus full-time building. And then the trajectory kind of like exploded. We raised seed round, then we raised Series A with Andreessen Horowitz, then we raised Series B with a Chinese publicly traded company. And kind of like it felt that it's just going to go up and to the right, like a usual startup thing, right? That's where the story changes a little bit. So the reality is that it's not always a straight curve up and to the right. There's always some kind of setbacks. So when we were shifting gears and getting investment from investors, basically, we saw that there's some problems that started to face. The company was growing, we had a lot more people, and the user growth stalled for us. The product innovation slowed down. I almost feel like there's a formula. The more people you add on the team, the less you can do. So it almost feels like it's nice to have this kind of like a two pizza approach, as we heard yesterday at the Pragma conference, that keeping teams small and keeping teams accountable. And the energy started to get wasted on internal issues. And founders started leaving, and like it started to become a bit more unmanageable. The team size at the time was about 60 to 80 people, so fast growing and required a bit of structure. However, I'm not going to go too much into like the bad parts. We can meet outside after that, and I'll tell you all about it, about the running startup and building. However, there's been some good positive moments. So the community has 17 million members. 4,000 people are now able to make their living through photography, specifically thanks to FireNPX. They pursued their passion, they were able to turn it into their business, left their daytime jobs, and became photographers to pursue what they love. This is something where, you're not touching necessarily 17 million lives, but you're touching 4,000 lives in that regard. And it's still a beacon of amazing photography for the community and for basically everyone in the world. In 2018, it got acquired by Visual China Group, Chinese publicly traded company, but it's still around as a brand 2023, and it's Toronto, kind of like local company in the beginning. So kind of like go back a little bit to how web2 got structured, how we built community. It basically comes down to keeping that community at the core of the interests. And what I mean by this is kind of like very simple. I'm going to show you a picture. We hosted over 500 different photo walks with tens of thousands of people in all over the world, from Hong Kong to Shenzhen to Berlin to London to basically like Los Angeles, everywhere, Toronto, you name it. Basically, every city in the world, we get to connect with people similar to those hackathons, but imagine those hackathons are happening every week with a few hundred members here, a few hundred members there, and we get to connect, make some friends, and kind of like basically learn from that. But as we go from Web 2 into Web 3, I left the company and started focusing a little bit on myself, and took a little pause and actually did a little detour. Those are actual screenshots in 2017. I wanted to build what's being done with FireNPX, but on the blockchain. So I kind of like tried to market that in 2017, tried to talk to investors, and a lot of investors basically did not understand what blockchain is, what we want to do. So I paused it and I said, well, it's a little bit too early. Let me just go and do some other things and come back to that. And I did come back to this in 2021. But underlying all of this, there's still a dream for me, is for liberating artists. And I think this is where Web3 and the message of Web3 is actually pretty powerful. So we can take what we've done with Web2, with FireNPX, and basically move it to Web3, and let's see what kind of improvements we can make through that. So first of all, why Web3, right? And one of the most powerful things is that you can help artists reverse the split that they're getting between their middlemen. So with photography, one of the major ways how people make money is sell that as a stock imagery. Majority of the stock imagery platforms would take somewhere between 75%, somewhere upwards to 80%. So basically, it becomes a little bit less fair. And with Web3, we thought, well, we can actually move it 85% or even higher. So it can be like 95, it can be 98%, or 100% if photographer or artist takes actual full custody of their art and markets that themselves, which is kind of like impossible in Web2 because you need that scale and connections. So the other thing is it brings the freedom for the artist. And those are three things I think which are important: provenance, sovereignty, and transparency. And with provenance, it basically creates, when you compare Web2 with Web3, it creates the origin. So it creates where the images have originated, so from a particular photographer, and it creates a history, whether images have been moved from one artist to another, obviously using NFTs. The second one is sovereignty. So you can actually, as an artist, take full control of the images. If you're on the photo stock side, those are stuck there in databases, and you go and delete, or you want to cancel this agreement with the company, whether it's like Flickr or Instagram or others, they'll keep your images, right? They'll just keep it for 6 months, 9 months, a year, or forever in case of Facebook. But in this case, with sovereignty, that allows you to actually take control and take your images out using Web3, using NFTs, and basically let people either use them or not. And transparency, lastly, it kind of like gives a sense of understanding whether art is being sold or resold, and whether there's any wash trading involved or something like that. So obviously some level of improvement, but with Web2, you don't know who is buying your images, you don't know how they're being used. And in that cases, I'm gonna give you a bit more examples. So kind of like, I see that as moving through that realm of it from a JPEG to a stock image to NFTs. And with a JPEG, if you took something with your phone, you can view, share, like, and save, kind of like very standard. As soon as you want to monetize the piece of art or a photo that you took, you basically have to be okay with rent. So you're never buying the image, you're actually renting, similar to how Spotify works. Like you get a subscription, but you're renting music at a time when you're listening. It's not exclusive. So oftentimes the same images are used multiple times, and we see it in whether it's in advertising or just basically like in advertising. And that's where the memes are coming from, where the same images are getting reused over and over again. So it's very important to know what's the provenance, where the images are coming from, and who else is using the images, especially if you're a company that needs to have a brand and reputation, things like that. For example, Apple, Samsung, and a whole bunch of others. And it's opaque in the sense that it's impossible to know who is buying your images and whether your competitor has bought the same image. With NFTs, you're obviously getting the benefit of transparency. So you get the provenance, as I mentioned earlier, the origins and history of that. So whoever has created the image, you can track that over time. And we're not inventing something new with this. It's actually been done hundreds of years with fine art. People would actually put their signature, if they buy a fine print that sits in museums these days, on the back of that canvas would be an ownership information. And when I first saw this, I'm like, oh, that's blockchain. You guys, we invented blockchain, and you guys invented blockchain 200 years before that. The other important thing is royalties. So obviously it does not exist in the Web2 world, but in the Web3 world, while it's getting diminished in the PFP world, in the profile pictures, it's still quite usable for the art because art is not sold and resold by traders day in and day out, but it's more of the respect of the collector and the next user or collector of that art. And lastly, ownership, you can basically verify it using blockchain. So I want to shift gears a little bit. I'm getting to the end of my slides, but kind of while building two companies span over 2 decades, I learned something that I want to share. I think it might be useful. So in the early days with my first startup, the life was, work 996. So working 9 to 9, 6 days a week. You could catch me in the office on Saturdays and Sundays late at night. Now it's more of a normal. As I mentioned, I'm getting a little bit older in the beginning of the presentation. So now the work is more like 9 to 5-ish. So before, everything that I would do was the first startup that was very personal. And if somebody has criticism, I would be the one crying in the corner or at home because I would take it very personally. Now it's a bit of a better work-life balance where there's a separation between what we do, what we're building as a platform, and my personal worth, for example. There was an approval of the crowd back then. And like one example of this, we invested a lot of time and money into making our office really cool. Some people here either been in our office in Toronto, and currently it's like more of a disregard of opinions and, you know, working from coffee shops or working from WeWork and places like that. Back then, there was more of an investment in appearances. We paid a huge premium, hundreds of thousands of dollars to have our sign visible in downtown Toronto so that people would know that we're there. I would not do this now, so there's no need for those nice perks. But back then, it was very, very important to me. And also back then, we had investors that were pushing us to build for growth. This is companies like Andreessen Horowitz and a whole bunch of others that are trying to instigate as massive growth as possible. And now it's more of a build with intention. So be more focused on solving crucial artists' issues that we can, that actually make a meaningful impact. And back then there was lots of drama. So now we're trying to deal with kind of like a little bit less drama. So as my finishing slide, kind of like what are the next 10 years? Because it's nice to look in decades. It takes a long time to build something. So we see for the next 10 years that there's going to be a lot of interest in keeping art royalties. And it's something that actually exists in some countries on the regulatory level, where whether you're in France or some European countries, if the artist is alive and the art is resold, there are some royalties that are attached to the physical art when it's resold. So taking the digital and making sure that it's available for 100% of art is kind of important. I think we'll see what I would call ubiquitous blockchains, that everything of importance will be on a blockchain. We just wouldn't know or care whether it's one blockchain or the other. That also stems from that transactions will go from expensive, as they are today on Ethereum, to cheap and to eventually free. So that's already happening with L2s. There's going to be a lot of talks today, but eventually the platform's either going to subsidize those, or there will be players that will subsidize the transactions for everybody else. And that's going to be completely free to transact, and we're going to have a much better future in that regard. There's also this happening when we started with web2, when we started with photo sharing, that was very simple. You share a JPEG, and that's it, right? Or a video, and that's it. Now there's a bit of an evolution in the artistic medium, and people are using, whether it's generative art plus photography, or whether it's on-chain art that evolves with every transaction. So those things are becoming more important and more interesting for the artist to start using some of the methodologies that only exist in Web3, like only the stuff that can actually be on-chain. And so those are making a very interesting impact. And the last two, digital displays. So we're currently hosting an exhibition in Italy with our current platform. And the art exhibits around the world are turning from physical to more digital. So it's a physical space, but there's this place, and the artwork is having a clear provenance, like who owns it or who can buy it and stuff like that. So kind of like more likely to see more of those digital screens around the world. So much so that I think people will have those in home eventually, or they'll have them in their Apple Vision Pro set. And lastly, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, IRL events like this one, like getting personally, getting to meet people is super critical regardless of how far the technology evolves, because it's a fist bump or a handshake that can make a big difference. Meeting those people, sharing experiences is something that we take personally. And with the current platform, we actually talk to every single photographer that's on platform, almost 1,000 people. We had a phone call or a Zoom call or something like that to know them a little bit, to verify who they are, and just to ask them like, hey, we're humans too. Let's chat, even though some are staying anonymous and they wouldn't turn their camera on, which is totally fine. So this is the end of my presentation. If you guys have questions, ask them. If not, I'll be outside as well to take questions and chat about all things building startups. Thank you.